Dialing it in from the right side of the galaxy with a serious dose of truth, justice, and freedom to have fun.
All right.
This is The Ross Report.
Yeah. Well, now.
All right, here we are trying to get through to my cousin Gary. Yeah, we're just making that phone call right now. We tried to get through. For some reason, we were getting a wrong number, but we're calling up New York. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to have him call the hotline. I'm going to have him call us on the hotline. We were trying to call him, and we may be calling the wrong number. So I'm going to just give him, yes. Here we go. So hopefully we'll get that call in real quick, and we'll be able to talk. I just thought about it because Gary and I haven't seen each other in a while. We grew up in the same neighborhood, right, next door to each other, a few years apart, and so when he went to Vietnam, I really wasn't sure to ask. I didn't know the questions to ask. What rank are you? What are you doing over there? All that kind of stuff. We just visited because we're cousins. That's all. Hey, Gary, are you on the line?
I'm on.
Hey, welcome to the Ross Report. Good to hear your voice.
Great to hear you.
Listen, I had a caller earlier, and he said, what's his MOS? How did he join? Did he get from our... I said, look, I don't know. That's not what we talked about as cousins. So, Gary, I think people are anxious to know a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, how you, where you went. I know you fought in Vietnam, right? So tell us a little bit about Gary Ross.
Well, yeah, as you know, I grew up in your neighborhood most of my youth, and went to schools locally there. When I was graduating from high school, I really didn't have any particular educational or employment focus, I should say, and I certainly didn't have an interest at continuing education at the time because I was rather focused on the Vietnam conflict that we were embroiled with at that time in our lives. And
yeah.
I felt compelled to serve, and so I joined. I did go to school. I did go to college, but I went there more for my athletic ability than my academic prowess.
Gary, remind me, where did you go to college?
Well, I ended up graduating from Villanova.
Oh, not too shabby.
No, but I went to a small school initially in central Pennsylvania called Juniata College.
Oh, yeah, Juniata. Good school.
I was there. It's about 35 miles southwest of Penn State. And that's when I left there, and I decided I needed to get my military service out of the way because it was, chewing at my craw. So I ended up volunteering for the draft. Anybody who joined the Army at that time or volunteered for the draft who had any secondary education, college education of any sort, was, kind of earmarked for somebody that they might want to move along into a more high-level position in the Army, even if you were a draftee. So,
right.
I ended up going into the Army, going through all the basic training and the advanced infantry training, and then they earmarked me for an NCO school in Fort Benning, Georgia. So I went there, and I ended up getting my stripes at Fort Benning, and then I went down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, where I think I read.
Yeah, that's when you and I connected and had a little visit.
That's right. And then right after the Fort Polk assignment, I was deployed overseas, and I joined the 25th Infantry Division in the infantry in the Cu Chi area of Vietnam. So that was our main base camp, Cu Chi. And, we were always outside the base camp in forward support bases and, forward fire bases anywhere we were.
Well, I'm thinking we should actually let people know how you and I became cousins, because that's a different kind of story as well. Your mom and my uncle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I actually, my mom had three of us, from a previous marriage, and she married your uncle, my father, my stepfather, and, we became part of his family, and we had three more children, so there was a total of six of us.
Yes.
And we all grew up as one big happy family.
All on Ross Road, of all things. All the Rosses on Ross Road. Yeah, exactly. How old were you when they got married? See, because I'm a little fuzzy on that. Look, I was in my own world back then. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't really keep up with the details of everybody else's lives. But how old were you, Gary, when Aunt Dot and Uncle Bill got married?
I was 8 years old.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I was being raised by my grandparents, and my mother was working part-time in the Conshohocken, West Conshohocken area, and I lived with my grandparents for that first stretch of 8 years before she married.
Yeah. Well, because you all were babies when was your dad in the service?
My dad was, yes, he was in the Army, and he unfortunately passed away at the age of 26. I was a year old. My older sister was 2. And my younger sister hadn't been born yet.
Right. Was he in the Korean War?
No, he was. He didn't serve overseas.
Oh, okay.
I think he was in the National Guard, and I'm in the process actually right now of pulling up his, military history from the government.
Oh, great. And Uncle Bill served. He was I think he was in Germany in World War II, wasn't he? As I recall. He
served in the Battle of the Bulge, and he spent a lot of time throughout Europe.
And we talked about that just kind of briefly, but that generation did not want to talk about their military service. I mean, they really were the quiet generation. When they came back, they just wanted to move on with their lives and not talk much about what they saw overseas. But I have one memento from Uncle Bill that I cherish. It's a very delicate pair of opera glasses. He brought back souvenirs, I think, for everybody. And these are mother of pearl opera glasses. They're not very good. You can't see too much out of them. But, I really cherish them because of that connection to Uncle Bill. Anyway, we do have to take a brief break, Gary. When we come back, we want to continue with your service in Vietnam and where you went from there to become a Secret Service agent. We'll be right back on the Ross Report. Stay with us. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Ross Report. On with my cousin, Gary Ross, and we're getting a little background on Gary and talking about, so how long, Gary, did you serve in Vietnam?
Well, I was in Vietnam for about 10 and a half months total.
Yeah.
I got a little early break to come home because I was accepted to return to college, and I had the opportunity to get out a little early because of that.
Yeah. So then that's when you went back to Villanova.
That's when I went back to Villanova, yeah. I finished up my service time in Vietnam. Actually, I wasn't in Vietnam when I finished. I was in Cambodia.
Oh, wow.
2 weeks we were in Cambodia, and I was extracted from there to go back to my Cu Chi base camp, where I would process out and fly home back to the States.
So Cambodia was always called the Secret War, but Cambodia there were terrible death squads incursion going into Vietnam, right? From Cambodia, which is why you all were sent over there to try to deal with them, correct?
Exactly. We were one of the first groups. We were the first of the 27th Wolfhounds of the 25th Infantry. So for any of your listeners who understand the military divisions and battalions, that's who we were with. And we did manage to land in Cambodia. We had to build an airstrip first.
Oh, no kidding.
And then land the plane. And we had to get out of the plane under fire and turn the plane around physically so it could take off and get out of there.
Oh, my God. I mean, you see, now, here we were living next door to each. Well, no, at this time, I would think I was already in Louisiana when you were. Yes, I definitely was in Louisiana because that's where you came to visit me from Fort Polk. But anyway, we never knew any of this stuff. I never knew that you were in Vietnam that long. That was a crazy time. That was a crazy time. And, there are a lot of us who had questions about the war, but would never, ever, ever, and I told people this, I thought it was unconscionable, the protesters. I said, I have a cousin in Vietnam. That is so wrong what they're doing. And did you all hear about that over there when you were over there?
Yeah, we obviously we were kept apprised of the news that was happening back in the States, and it was a little unsettling to us, but we were on a mission. We were all really more concerned about keeping each other alive and to be worried about what was going on back in the States. What was interesting is when I did get home and I went back to college, it's where there's where you saw that divide, because people on campus were a little younger than us because we had already had a couple of years behind us,
right? And
their attitude about that war was not positive, and we had to somehow assimilate into the college environment at an interesting time. And when we went back to college at Villanova, there were several of us who were veterans. I would say 15 or 20 or more. And we created our own veterans fraternity because we really couldn't assimilate particularly well with the rest of the student body.
So incredible. Yeah, that is terrible what happened to the Vietnam returning vets. And I'm glad to see that over the past couple of decades now, I think that you all are getting the recognition you so deserved and didn't get when you first came back. And so I think people are really appreciative more and more of the service of the Vietnam vets, especially in light of the larger, context of the war. But anyway, Gary, so after that, when you came back and you got your degree, how were you on that track to get into the Secret Service?
Well, a few of the vets that I was with who graduated ahead of me, one in particular, or two of them, actually got jobs with the Secret Service. And while I was still in school, we stay connected to these guys. And that's the way military guys are. They always stay connected. I have some of my dearest friends who served with me in Vietnam to this day. And he said, well, there's this great job at the Secret Service. Maybe you ought to look into it. So I said, fine, I'll take a look. And, I got an application and I applied. Nixon was president at the time. And what happened was there was a hiring freeze. And though I was probably a qualified applicant, they had to put my application on the shelf until the hiring freeze was lifted. So I ended up getting the job at their recommendation. And I got hired in 1975, January.
Wow.
And I was with them. I started in Philadelphia, was there for 4.5 years. And then, it was all criminal investigations when you first start in the field offices. And then I went to Florida and I was in the West Palm Beach office.
So this was in the Secret Service. You do criminal investigations in the United States?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And beyond the United States today. But at the time, there was counterfeiting, there was check fraud, there was anything related to government financial instruments were things that the Secret Service could investigate. And half of your career is spent in investigation at least. The other half is spent in protection.
Mm-hmm.
So it was me in the field for really almost 9 years before I finally got to a protection assignment. Not that I didn't have some temporary jaunts here and there through that 9 years where you'd stand post for some president or vice president, et cetera.
Right. Well, is the Secret Service still under the Treasury Department?
It is not.
It's been moved. Where?
It used to be under the Treasury. Now it's under Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, okay.
So it's a different agency than it was when we were in, I think.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It was moved when Bush became Bush 43, right? Did he move it? Or before that?
No, it was Homeland Security happened after 9/11. Yeah, so
it had to be Bush. Yeah. Okay. So 9 years in the field, and then you moved into security after that. So that would be 1984 that you moved in.
1975 to 1980. I think it was 1983 to 1985. I was assigned to the former President Nixon detail, who was based. He had offices in New York but lived in northern New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Oh, you see, I had to call you to interview you to find out all this stuff about my cousin. I had no idea you were on the Nixon detail.
Yes,
that's amazing.
And, it was, it wasn't what a Secret Service guy would think is a plum assignment. You know, you're with a former, your activity and your exposure with a former, especially somebody who doesn't travel as much anymore,
right.
It's not a really fun assignment.
Right.
So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time there. My thoughts were that I wanted to go to Washington and do this protection work.
Right.
And so I was fortunate to only be there for 2 years because Nixon actually signed off as protection when I was working with him.
What kind of guy was he behind the scenes, Gary?
Yeah, he was an interesting person. I know he had quite a checkered past from all accounts, but if you get to know him personally, walking with him, talking with him, you know, he seemed to me like a very, very enjoyable person to just be with, to talk to.
Yeah, apparently a really, really intelligent, deeply intelligent person, but, you know, rather complex from what I can gather from what I've read about him.
Yeah, he was very intelligent, but he also had the incredible ability to have a photographic memory. You know, if you were walking with him, he could replay the entire Mets baseball game to you from the first pitch of the first inning till it's over.
Really? Seriously? I would have never thought that about Nixon. You know, oh, man, I'll tell you what. Well, okay, so that's 1985, but then, because Reagan is president at the time.
Well, there was a period before Reagan became president that I was assigned to his detail in Washington, and I was working in Florida at the time, you know, at West Palm. Mm-hmm. Because when he became president, he was president-elect for several months before he was installed.
That's true, yeah.
I was on the president-elect detail. So I got a chance to spend some time around him for about 45 days or so.
Oh, how awesome! What was he? I mean, he just seemed to be such a great guy. I got to meet him when he was running the first time for president in '76 when he didn't get the nomination. Right. I believe it was '76. He came to Lafayette, and I got to visit with him a little bit at a party. And he just seemed to be so genial. I mean, he was so easygoing. It didn't seem to have much artifice about him.
Yeah, well, he was always a real advocate of the agents surrounding him, and that was enhanced considerably after the assassination attempt right in March of that same year.
Yes, that's right. That was what, 81 was the assassination attempt?
Yes.
Wow. You weren't there at the time. Yeah.
But the guy who was the shift leader when I was working with him was the guy that was one of the guys that was shot. So I knew who that was.
Man.
Yeah.
That had to be very unsettling times.
Yeah. So anyway.
So then, moving on from there, you were in the Capitol by this time. So.
But when I left the Nixon detail, I just wanted to give you a little aside because I was the last working shift with him for his Secret Service protection for his career, and he invited us in his home to have a drink with him, have a bottle of wine. So he went down to his wine cellar and pulled a bottle of 1953 Cabernet out because 53 was the first year he started his Secret Service protection.
Oh, my God.
So he wanted to just celebrate that with a handful of guys, myself being one of them, in his house.
Oh,
and
how
we
awesome.
had a wonderful chat for 2 or 3 hours about, anything under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
He was telling stories and everybody was having a great time. But that was it. And then he gave up the protection. I was reassigned to Washington to take over on the Bush detail when he was vice president.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that was 1984 when 85 when you went to be with the Bushes. We're going to take a break right now, and we're going to get into that aspect of it and talk a little bit about the Bushes and some experiences that you had with them when you were on their Secret Service detail. My cousin Gary Ross, former Secret Service agent and just a really great guy. And I told him, Gary, I'm going to embarrass you. I said, think of a better-looking blonde George Clooney, and that's my cousin Gary. Anyway, you don't have to say anything. All right. We'll be right back on the Ross Report. Got to take a break, and we'll be right back and hear more from Cousin Gary, the Secret Service agent. Stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Ross Report. On the line with us is my cousin Gary Ross, a former Secret Service agent who guarded the Bush family, and now we're up to that point in your career. How did you get that assignment, Gary?
Well, it was kind of like, if you had an interest in one or the other detail, presidential or vice presidential, you could make that known. I was obviously earmarked from guys that were on the president's detail to try to convince me to come there. But, you know me as a person, I'm a little more reserved and laid back. And
very, very. Go ahead.
For that fishbowl existence in the presidential level during, the time of a seated president. So I opted to go with the Bushes because the feedback I was getting from a lot of agents I knew on that detail was it was just a great place to work. They were just wonderful people. And so that's what led me to the Bush detail. And I remained there from 85 till 89.
Right. We always heard those stories about the differences in the boys because at that time were they in their teens or 20s?
They were in their 20s, I guess. I remember George W. when this is before he was owner of any baseball team or governor.
Right.
He was running around the Naval Observatory, which was the official residence of the vice president, with the two little twin girls, which couldn't have been more than a year and a half, 2 years old.
Uh-huh.
So, I got to see him at a very young age, George W.
Right.
I saw Jed a few times there, too, but they were young. They were very young, and of course, I was too at the time.
Yeah, so you were mostly around the vice president and Barbara Bush.
Exactly. I spent the first 3 years with the vice president, traveling with him, doing advance work for him, and the final year and a half, I was assigned to Barbara Bush, and most of my travel and attention was focused on her when she was traveling separately, but when they were traveling together, you would rejoin your other colleagues on the vice president's detail. So.
Yeah. Well, she was such a hoot. I mean, where he seemed to be just kind of easygoing and all that, she really had she had steel in her spine, that one.
She did. She was a wonderful, wonderful person to be around. And both of the Bushes were extremely respectful, honorable, dignified people. They were extremely compassionate. I don't know that maybe some of the pain and the loss of their daughter, Robin, way back in the early part of their life didn't contribute to the way they felt about people around them. An example would be, when most presidents and world leaders go off on vacation, they don't really care whether they're, impacting the lives of the staff and the Secret Service that cover them. But the Bushes were very, very focused on that. And every time there was a holiday, they made sure that they stayed at the home base where all the agents were based in Washington, D.C., so that they could spend time with their families. And then they would go off the next day to Houston, Texas, which was their home.
Yeah.
For the rest of the holiday with their family.
That is amazing. And we've always heard that. But, sometimes people have a public persona that's not quite how they are in private. But it sounds to me like they were exactly the same in public and private, that they were very empathetic people and very kind.
If you could adopt parents, they would be on the top of the list. It made you feel like you were a son or a daughter to them when you were working with them.
Yeah.
That's how gracious they were.
And Uncle Bill, your dad and my dad and most of our family at the time were Democrats, and that's what we came from, a Democrat background. And so I thought that would be an interesting to get Uncle Bill's take on that. But Uncle Bill seemed to really be very fond of them.
He was. I know he voted, across his party line because he just felt so strongly about, what kind of person George and Bush was and his wife.
Yeah, so, really great people.
Not that me being on the detail didn't, help that decision for him.
Yeah, yeah. So any interesting anecdotes that you can share, anything that that people might be interested in about some of the details that some of the trips maybe that you went on with them?
Yeah, well, he had a home up in Maine in Walker's Point, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the boat pilots on the detail. They sent me to the Coast Guard school in Norfolk, Virginia, to learn how to pilot boats, and then I became a chase boat for the Bush when he was up in Maine and anywhere else he went, because every time he traveled, he loved to go boating and fishing. So we had a chase boat with rescue people in it and Coast Guard people in it, and I was the pilot of the boat. So I had many trips to Walker's Point in Maine where we followed him around from time to time. Whatever he did. We always used to call him the speed demon because everything he did was fast. He could play a 4-hour round of golf in an hour and 45 minutes.
That's what we've been seeing on the television, that people were laughing about it, that, that he loved and that he scared the bejesus out of the Putin's security guy on his boat, where he really opened it up and went full speed ahead. Scared people.
Yeah, he would always duck into shallow water, knowing that we had more water to draw with our bigger boat, and he knew he would play with us to do that. We'd keep him in sight, but we wouldn't be able to get in behind him, because he would do that.
What a character! Any foreign trips that you took with him? We traveled in my time with him about 53 countries, and I can't even count the cities we went to. Yeah, I know. He made that comment, you die, we fly. So he was on that detail. Any foreign dignitaries who passed away, he was sent as a representative of the president. So you went on some of those?
Yes, I did. And sometimes I was out in front of them before, not traveling with them, but doing the advance at that location. And I remember being in Poland when we were there on that trip. That was kind of an amazing location at that time. Lech Walesa was just coming up, building his constituency at that time. And we were working with the Russian security in Poland, and it was just an interesting trip. But we made a lot of those, and some of them were blurs. You could be in 3 countries in one day.
Seriously?
And we got to the point where ship work was almost abolished, where if you started the day with them at 6 in the morning, you would put them to bed that night. And you do that all day, and then you take the next day to travel to the next country or city, and the other shift would take them for the whole next day.
Well, typically, how many people in a shift?
Well, it's probably it's a number that's usually classified in today's lingo, but back then we had a fraction of what we had. Of course, he's the vice president; he's not the president.
Right,
so
right.
Fewer in number covering him than would normally happen with a president. But there was always at least 15 or 20 guys working on a given shift.
Wow. So, and being in Poland at that time, that had to be really interesting because Poland was still under the control of Russia at the time, correct? And that was when Lech Walesa was building his movement. Right,
and we met Lech Walesa before he was in power. But what was interesting about that trip to me was, as an agent, we were partnering with a lot of the Russian agents.
Yeah.
And it was really a really contentious, stiff thing, working day to day with them. But afterwards, when the shifts were over, we all went off together and enjoyed some party time, after hours. Mm-hmm. And it was incredible how open and fun they were to be with, But when we were working, we were absolutely straight, and committed to the duties at hand.
Well, did the wall come down when you were guarding the president? No, he was president at the time. Did you ever guard him when he was president?
Who?
Bush.
Bush. I can only tell you that I guarded acting President Bush when Reagan underwent surgery in 1985.
Okay.
Very short period of time, but not when he was president. No.
Okay. Very good. Because he got elected in '88. So
that's right.
Yeah. Okay. And you were gone from there by then, or did you stick around through that inauguration?
Well, I stayed. I did the advance in New Orleans for the '88 Republican National.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Reagan was down there as well, and there was another group of obviously presidential protection people doing the advance for Reagan. But we partnered. The advance team that I had and the advance team that the president had. And that was a very, very demanding assignment. I think I was in New Orleans for 5 straight weeks, and I don't think I averaged more than 3.5 hours sleep every day.
Now, wait a minute. Was it demanding on Bourbon Street, or was it demanding to
it was demanding on the work front. It was no party time for Bourbon Street, I can tell you that.
Okay. Gary, how long were you in the Secret Service? I mean, total?
For 20.5 years.
Gee whiz.
Yep.
And then after that, you got into private security? Let me say, what year did you leave the Secret Service?
I retired out of New York in 1995. I went to New York to investigate financial fraud, which was what I worked on in Washington after I was with Bush for a couple of years.
Oh.
I wanted to get into the white-collar crime, so I went to New York. I ultimately got assigned to the bank fraud squad, and we had a ball chasing down white-collar crime until I retired in 1995.
Wow. What were some of the bigger cases that you all?
Well, they weren't really monster cases. They were just bank fraud cases, but they involved, high-level banking officials and letters of credit that were being exchanged. A lot of fraud.
Mm-hmm.
But
any foreign banks involved in some of that, like laundering money or anything like that?
Well, yeah, there was some of that as well. But a lot of that at the time, we had offices overseas. So whenever we had a case that required follow-up investigation on an extension of an investigation that started in the U.S., it would be handed off to the people that were working overseas for us.
Yeah. So then you went to after the bank fraud? Then you went where?
After the bank, when I retired out of New York, I got a job with an investment bank in New York here, and I was there for 4.5 years as their VP in operations. And it was very confining. After a year career of traveling the world, whirlwind, I was in a building with 7 or 8 floors, and I got claustrophobia. So I ended up finally I don't know how I survived as long as I did, but after 4 years, I finally left and I joined an international security consultancy in New York, and that carried me right through 9/11. And I was working by myself because the company was based in Virginia, and I had a shingle in New York for that company, but I had no staff.
Good Lord.
So when 9/11 hit, I was going, it was a crazy time.
Were you down in that area? Was your office down in the area where 9/11 hit, where the World Trade Center was?
Office was at in Penn Plaza, right? Several few blocks north of the But I wasn't in the city that day. I was working a client out in New Jersey, and I couldn't get into the city once 9/11 happened because they shut the city down. So I was outside the city when it happened. Yes.
Oh my gosh, what terrible times!
Right.
What terrible times. We'll be back with my cousin Gary. We got one more break, and we'll be back to wrap it up. It's been a fascinating discussion. We want to continue. He's got a few more chapters to tell us about, and we'll be right back on the Ross Report. Stay with us, won't you?
Yeah, we get it.
Hey, Gary.
They are.
All right, so we'll wrap it up.
So
we have about another
leave me alone.
5 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes.
And Bernadette Lee.
Yeah.
Acadiana's Morning News. Headlines tomorrow morning starting at 5:30.
Right. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Many older homes were not wired to
Oh
meet
yeah, I
today's
think
demand
they're
for
really
electricity,
fascinated
which
to hear
results
this
in trip
story.
breakers
The
when
behind the
circuits
scenes,
are
like with
overloaded.
Nixon. I didn't know you
may
had done
notice this
that.
when you use your coffee pot and microwave at the same
That sort of
time,
thing.
or when
And
you
I think
use a
they
vacuum
like
cleaner at
hearing
the
the
same time
affirmation.
someone
This
else
is
using
bush
a hair
country. I
dryer.
mean, people like
The
him.
result for this is
He's
simple.
been here.
Have a licensed
He traveled
electrician
here. He's
install
given
an
speeches
additional or
here.
dedicated circuit
He
and
did a lot of
eliminate
hurricane
overloading.
relief here,
More tips and advice, visit
and
this
people
Town's
really
Community
love him
Radio
for
station's
that.
website.
You know. All right, on the air with my cousin Gary Ross, former Secret Service agent. So, Gary, we have a caller who's calling in. Greg, go ahead. You're on the Ross Report with Gary Ross.
Yeah. Hey, Gary, how are you?
Good.
Listen, I worked with a guy back in the late 70s, early 80s who ended up becoming President Bush's, when it was on the security detail. Do you know a guy named David Lee?
David Lee, yes, I know of him. I didn't work closely with him, but I know who he is, yes.
Well, he was. We worked together way back when, and he ended up being. I met President Bush twice. Well, the first time he was vice president, and it was in Old Orchard Beach, Maine. He went to a baseball game over there, and I got a picture of him shaking my hand going into the stadium. And you might have been on the detail. I guess this was like in, I don't know, 84, 85.
Yeah, if it was
Something
85,
like
I could have been because David was there in 85.
Yeah, and then I met David at at the All-Star game. Well, I met President Bush at the All-Star game, and David was on his detail in 1991.
Okay.
And I haven't talked to him in years, and I was wondering if he's still alive, to be honest with you.
I can look him up. I've got a directory of all the former agents that they publish, and I can maybe track them down, and I can let Carol know, and maybe she can share it with you.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you what, Greg, hang on, and we'll get your number, okay?
That sounds great.
Just
Thank
hang on
you so
when we go
much.
off the air. Okay, Greg, thanks for calling. Okay, Gary, so now we're almost up to the present. So, well, we are actually, because from there, you went to Time Warner doing security?
Yeah, after the period I was with, the consultancy in 9/11, I found out that the consultancy I was working for was trying to sell their company, and they weren't telling me.
Uh-oh.
I did find out, and I took the opportunity to preempt them. And what happened was the head of the security detail at Time Warner was separated from the company, and that job was given to a colleague of mine in the Secret Service who actually worked for me at one time. He ended up being a deputy director of the Secret Service. He got the job at Time Warner, and he picked up the phone and called me and said, "I need to build a global program. Can you help me?" And
wow.
said, "When do you want me to start?" And that was 17 years ago plus.
I'll be darned. So, well, gee, Gary, it must be time for you to make another move, huh?
Yeah, I'm going into the next chapter of my life. I don't want to turn off my brain completely. I'd like to do some consulting or advising for a little bit of time, but the full-time work is now two careers behind me. So,
yeah,
time to enjoy some of what you work for. Relax and
got it.
With family, etc. So
yeah, well, you might. I know you're a very kind of reticent, quiet guy, but you might think about putting down on paper your memoirs. Because you've had a really interesting time.
My kids have been after me to do that, and now that I'm getting to a point where I can actually sit down and catch my breath from all this full-time work, maybe I will.
Oh, that would be great, Gary. I can't tell you how much I really appreciate you being on with us today and sharing some of your thoughts with us. And I know you must have a certain feeling in your heart about the former president, the vice president that you guarded, and see the outpouring of really great affection for him at this point in time. Because at the time that he was vice president, they weren't very affectionate in the media.
Yeah.
So
no, it was still a difficult time, but he is unlike a lot of politicians we are all familiar with today. He really truly was somebody that both sides of the aisle could work with and talk to, and there was very little in the way of alienation for somebody like H.W.
Yeah, and I think that comes through now. It's just that it just seems ironic to see all the tributes coming from people who didn't work with him very, very well when he was president. So that was the biggest disappointment to me when he lost. To a Bill Clinton. I mean, that I was scratching my head. That was the biggest disappointment to me. The man who was probably the best prepared person ever for the presidency, with the background that he had, not only in business in the real world, but also the range of activities he did as a part of government. CIA director and vice president. No, I mean, he was simply an amazing human being and very, very, very self-effacing. Did not draw attention to himself.
No, but even in loss, he was extremely gracious. Penned a perfectly wonderful letter to Bill Clinton, who was taking over, and that letter was posted online for anybody that wants to read it. But that just tells you what kind of a person he was.
He was great, and I thank you so much for being with us. We know what kind of person you are, a terrific person, and you wouldn't have gotten to that level of service in the Secret Service had you not been. Gary, thanks so much. Then thanks for a long overdue thanks for your service to our country. I'm proud of you, my cousin. I'm proud of you.
Happy to be with you all today. Thanks.
Good luck and happy holidays. Blessings. Maybe one of these days our travel will intersect and we can get together somewhere in Pennsylvania.
We look forward to it.
That would be great, Gary. Thanks again. Bye-bye. Oh, man, I tell you what, that was really awesome for me to be able to do that. Greg is hanging on. You're going to get that information from Greg, and maybe we can check it out, and I can send it to Gary, and he can check it out and get it back to us. Well, I hope you have enjoyed that as much as I have. Living right next door to each other, but not being exactly the same age and operating in different circles and that sort of thing. So it was a real it was a real eye-opener for me. I had no idea about the range of service my cousin did. But that's the way my cousins are. I mean, they don't talk much about what they're doing. Like my nephew who's, doing crazy secret stuff all over the place, and I can't even talk about. He's my nephew-in-law. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. I do have to tell you one quick thing, though. My good friends at MPW Properties, they have got the most amazing places all over Lafayette that they want to help you get into. So you just give Ashley a call, 232-1438. She's going to help you. They have great, highly visible locations, and she's going to help you get into the one that works best for you. That's MPW Properties. Check Ashley out, 232-1438 or mpwproperties.com. Got to go, people. I hope you've enjoyed this hour as much as I have enjoyed it. We'll be back 22 hours from now. Be talking charter, be talking taxes, all that stuff that we have to get back to reality. 22 hours from now. Please drive safely. Love each other, eh? Go Cajuns. Cure Bowl? Really? Ooh, great stuff. Yeah. Bye-bye.